Hello everyone. It is Saturday. I have been cleaning and I accidentally cleaned up our little studio here, and so I've put it back together. And today I'm going to read you a story from a textbook that I grew up with. I was in 8th grade when I first learned to read thoughtfully, and I learned to read thoughtfully out of this book and this book at a camp where we read and wrote. And I was thinking about that camp this morning in our writing group, the Writing Room CLE, and I was remembering these books, and I was remembering the people who have taught me to read and to write thoughtfully, and I thought, I wonder if anyone else would like to learn to read and write thoughtfully. And since someone has donated these copies to the bookstore, I put together a little stack of books. This is a book of short stories called The Problem with Relativity. I have never read this book. It is a surprise. This is a stack of little notebooks. And these two books are the two books that taught me to read thoughtfully. And I remember I wrote in the cover of my copy something that Max Perkins said back when he was editing Scott Fitzgerald, which is that good writing is never finished, it is only abandoned. And that is advice that has stuck with me for my whole life. So, in this book, one of the stories from which I was taught to read thoughtfully is by Isaac Bashevis Singer. It is called The Sun from America. The village of Lentshin was tiny, a sandy marketplace where the peasants of the area met once a week. It was surrounded by little huts with thatched roofs or shingles green with moss. The chimneys looked like pots. Between the huts there were fields where the owners planted vegetables or pastured their goats. In the smallest of these huts lived old Burl, a man in his 80s, and his wife, who was called Burlsha, wife of Burl. Old Burl was one of the Jews who had been driven from their villages in Russia and had settled in Poland. In Lentshin they mocked the mistakes he made while praying aloud. He spoke with a sharp R. He was short, broad-shouldered, and had a small white beard, like you, Cha-Cha. And summer and winter he wore a sheepskin hat, a padded cotton jacket, and stout boots. He walked slowly, shuffling his feet. He had a half-acre of field, a cow, a goat, and chickens. The couple had a son, Samuel, who had gone to America 40 years ago. It was said in Lentshin that he became a millionaire there. Every month, the Lentshin letter carrier brought old Burl a money order and a letter that no one could read because many of the words were English. How much money Samuel sent his parents remained a secret. 3 times a year, Burl and his wife went on foot to Zakroksim and cashed the money orders there. But they never seemed to use the money. What for? The garden, the cow, and the goat provided most of their needs. Besides, Burlcha sold chickens and eggs, and from these there was enough to buy flour for bread. No one cared to know where Burl kept the money that his son sent him. There were no thieves in Lentshin. The hut consisted of one room which contained all their belongings: the table, the shelf for meat, the shelf for milk foods, the 2 beds, and the clay oven. Sometimes the chickens roosted in the woodshed, and sometimes, when it was cold, in a coop near the oven. The goat, too, found shelter inside when the weather was bad. The more prosperous villagers had kerosene lamps, but Burl and his wife did not believe in newfangled gadgets. What was wrong with a wick in a dish of oil? Only for the Sabbath would Burlsha buy 3 tallow candles at the store. In summer, the couple got up at sunrise and retired with the chickens. In the long winter evenings, Burlsha spun flax at her spinning wheel, and Burl sat beside her in the silence of those who enjoy their rest. Like you are a big rester. Once in a while, when Burl came home from the synagogue after evening prayers, he brought news to his wife. In Warsaw there were strikers who demanded that the Tsar abdicate. A heretic by the name of Dr. Herzl had come up with the idea that Jews should settle again in Palestine. Burlsha listened and shook her bonneted head. Her face was yellowish and wrinkled like a cabbage leaf. There were bluish sacs under her eyes, and she was half deaf. Burl had to repeat each word he said to her. She would say, "Oh, the things that happen in the big cities." Here in Lentshin, nothing happened except usual events. A cow gave birth to a calf, a young couple had a circumcision party, or a girl was born and there was no party. Occasionally, someone died. Lentshin had no cemetery, and the corpse had to be taken to Zakroksim. I do not speak Polish. I am probably pronouncing that wrong. Actually, Lentshin had become a village with few young people. The young people left for Zakropcim, for Novi Dvor, for Warsaw, and sometimes for the United States. Like Samuel's, their letters were illegible, the Yiddish mixed with the languages of the countries where they were now living. They sent photographs in which the men wore top hats and the women fancy dresses, like squiresses. Burl and Brocha also received such photographs, but their eyes were failing, and neither he nor she had glasses. They could barely make out the pictures. Samuel had sons and daughters with Gentile names and grandchildren who had married and had their own offspring. Their names were so strange that Burl and Brocha could never remember them. But what difference do names make? America was far, far away on the other side of the ocean, at the edge of the world. A Talmud teacher who came to luncheon had said that Americans walked with their heads down and their feet up. Burl and Brocha could not grasp this. How was it possible? But since the teacher said so, it must be true. Brocha pondered for some time, and then she said, "One can get accustomed to anything." And so it remained. From too much thinking, God forbid one may lose one's wits. One Friday morning, when Brocha was kneading the dough for the Sabbath loaves, the door opened and a nobleman entered. He was so tall that he had to bend down to get through the door. He wore a beaver hat and a cloak bordered with fur. He was followed by Haskell, the coachman from Zakropcim, who carried 2 leather valises with brass locks. In astonishment, Brocha raised her eyes. The nobleman looked around and said to the coachman in Yiddish, "Here it is." He took out a silver ruble and paid him. The coachman tried to hand him change, but he said, "You can go now." When the coachman closed the door, the nobleman said, "Mother, it's me, your son, Samuel. Sam." Brocha heard the words and her legs grew numb. Her hands, to which pieces of dough were sticking, lost their power. The nobleman hugged her, kissed her forehead, both her cheeks. Brocha began to cackle like a hen, "My son, my son." At that moment, Burl came in from the woodshed, his arms piled with logs. The goat followed him. When he saw a nobleman kissing his wife, Burl dropped the wood and exclaimed, "What is this?" The nobleman let go of Brocha and embraced Burl. "Father." For a long time, Burl was unable to utter a sound. He wanted to recite holy words that he had read in the Bible, but he could remember nothing. Then he asked, "Are you Samuel?" "Yes, Father, I am Samuel." "Well, peace be with you." Burl grasped his son's hand. He was still not sure that he was not being fooled. Samuel wasn't as tall and heavy as this man, but then Burl reminded himself that Samuel was only 15 years old when he had left home. He must have grown in that faraway country. Burl asked, "Why didn't you let us know that you were coming?" "Didn't you receive my cable?" Samuel asked. Burl did not know what a cable was. Brocha had scraped the dough from her hands and enfolded her son. He kissed her again and asked, "Mother, didn't you receive a cable?" "What? If I live to see this, I'm happy to die," Brocha said, amazed by her own words. Burl, too, was amazed. These were just the words that he would have said earlier if he had been able to remember. After a while, Burl came to himself and said, "Pesha, you will have to make a double Sabbath pudding in addition to the stew." It was years since Burl had called Brocha by her given name. When he wanted to address her, he would say, "Listen," or "Say." It is the young, or those from the big cities, who call a wife by her name. Only now did Brocha begin to cry. Yellow tears ran from her eyes, and everything became dim. Then she called out, "It's Friday. I have to prepare for the Sabbath." Yes, she had to knead the dough and braid the loaves. With such a guest, she had to make a larger Sabbath stew. The winter day is short, and she must hurry. Her son understood what was worrying her, because he said, "Mother, I will help you." Brocha wanted to laugh, but a choked sob came out. "What are you saying? God forbid." The nobleman took off his cloak and jacket and remained in his vest, on which hung a solid gold watch chain. He rolled up his sleeves and came to the trough. "Mother, I was a baker for many years in New York," he said, and he began to knead the dough. "What? You are my darling son who will say Kaddish for me." She wept raspingly. Her strength left her, and she slumped onto the bed. Burl said, "Women will always be women." And he went to the shed to get more wood. The goat sat down near the oven. She gazed with surprise at this strange man, his height, and his bizarre clothes. The neighbors had heard the good news that Burl's son had arrived from America, and they came to greet him. The women began to help Burl to prepare for the Sabbath. Some laughed, some cried. The room was full of people, as at a wedding. They asked Burl's son, "What is new in America?" And Burl's son answered, America is all right. Do Jews make a living? One eats white bread there, on weekdays. Do they remain Jews? I am not a Gentile. After Baruch blessed the candles, father and son went to the little synagogue across the street. A new snow had fallen. The son took large steps, but Baruch warned him, "Slow down." In the synagogue, the Jews recited, "Let us exult and come, my groom." All the time, the snow outside kept falling. After prayers, when Baruch and Samuel left the holy place, the village was unrecognizable. Everything was covered in snow. One could see only the contours of the roofs and the candles in the windows. Samuel said, "Nothing has changed here." Baruch had prepared gefilte fish, chicken soup with rice, meat, carrot stew. Baruch recited the benediction over a glass of ritual wine. The family ate and drank, and when it grew quiet for a while, one could hear the chirping of the house cricket. The son talked a lot, but Baruch understood little. His Yiddish was different and contained foreign words. After the final blessing, Samuel asked, "Father, what did you do with all the money I sent you?" Baruch raised his white brows. "It's here." "Didn't you put it in a bank?" "There is no bank in Lenshin." "Where do you keep it?" Baruch hesitated. "One is not allowed to touch money on the Sabbath, but I will show you." He crouched beside the bed and began to shove something heavy. A boot appeared. Its top was stuffed with straw. Baruch removed the straw, and the son saw that the boot was full of gold coins. He lifted it. "Father, this is a treasure," he called out. "Well, why didn't you spend it?" "On what? Thank God we have everything." "Why didn't you travel somewhere?" "Where to? This is our home." The son asked one question after the other, but Baruch's answer was always the same. They wanted for nothing. The garden, the cow, the goat, the chickens provided them with all they needed. The son said, "If thieves knew about this, your lives wouldn't be safe." "There are no thieves here." "What will happen to the money?" "You take it?" Slowly, Beryl and Baruch grew accustomed to their son and his American Yiddish. Baruch could hear him better now. She even recognized his voice. He was saying, "Perhaps we should build a larger synagogue." "The synagogue is big enough," Baruch replied. "Perhaps a home for old people?" "No one sleeps in the street." The next day, after the Sabbath meal was eaten, a Gentile from Zakrixim brought a paper. It was the cable. Beryl and Baruch lay down for a nap. They soon began to snore. The goat, too, dozed off. The son put on his cloak and his hat and went for a walk. He strode with his long legs across the marketplace. He stretched out a hand and touched a roof. He wanted to smoke a cigar, but he remembered it was forbidden on the Sabbath. He had a desire to talk to someone, but it seemed that the whole of Lenshin was asleep. He entered the synagogue. An old man was sitting there, reciting psalms. Samuel asked, "Are you praying?" "What else is there to do when one gets old?" "Do you make a living?" The old man did not understand the meaning of these words. He smiled, showing his empty gums, and then he said, "If God gives health, one keeps on living." Samuel returned home. Dusk had fallen. Baruch went to the synagogue for the evening prayers, and the son remained with his mother. The room was filled with shadows. Baruch began to recite in a solemn sing-song, "God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, defend the poor people of Israel and thy name. The holy Sabbath is departing. The welcome week is coming to us. Let it be one of health, wealth, and good deeds." "Mother, you don't need to pray for wealth," Samuel said. "You are wealthy already." Baruch did not hear, or pretended not to. Her face had turned into a cluster of shadows. In the twilight, Samuel put his hand into his jacket pocket and touched his passport, his checkbook, his letters of credit. He had come here with big plans. He had a valise filled with presents for his parents. He wanted to bestow gifts on the village. He brought not only his own money, but funds from the Lenshin Society in New York, which had organized a ball for the benefit of the village. But this village in the hinterland needed nothing. From the synagogue, one could hear hoarse chanting. The cricket, silent all day, started again its chirping. Baruch began to sway and utter holy rhymes inherited from mothers and grandmothers. Thy holy sheep in mercy keep, in Torah and good deeds. Provide for all their needs, shoes, clothes, and bread, and the Messiah's tread. So, this book has stories by many writers, and this story made me think of how much we want things, and how much we want things that we probably don't really need. And I have learned from Cha-Cha to be content if I have a full belly and a warm place to nap. But I know that we need more than that. And so through the generosity of our donors, we have put together stacks of books and Blind Date with a Book, which is Chocolate from Fears and a mystery book for your entertainment. We have put together activity kits and gift sets, and we are shipping those all out at cost and free. If you use the coupon, I am really broke, it will give you a 25% discount on an order, which means that your payment will only cover the cost of shipping. If you are really broke, you can use the coupon No Really Super Broke, which means we will ship it to you for free. And I am so excited to be able to send those to all of you readers out there on the internet. In the meantime, keep reading.